Okay, well, since it's noon, we're going to go ahead and get the conversation started. Lily, I just see you and me here right now, so no pressure or anything, but I might ask you to join me in the conversation a little bit more
Sure.
than I might have had I been here alone. But my experience with Twitter Spaces is that folks might drop in as we go on. I'm just gonna dive in and ask you to join me in the conversation, Lily, and we'll see if we get some other folks to join us as well. I am recording the conversation. People will be able to come back and hear it later as well. Again, this is only the second time I've done this, but it worked out really well. The last time we had a great conversation about boundaryless collaboration, and I had pointed people to my blog in which I talked about the idea of building back boundaryless. And I continued a little bit of that thread in my next blog post, which I had linked to from the tweet announcing this Twitter Spaces discussion. If you're joining us and listening in, or if you are listening to this recording later, if you just go to my Twitter profile and click on the Linktree link, you can click on the boundaryless link, and that will take you to a blog entry called Five Resolutions for Better Collaboration in 2022. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I know Lily's ready to talk with me about this because she just had some time to read up on it. But just to help people get some context, if you haven't had a chance to read the blog, or you just would like a read, I'll do that now. So in the blog post, I talk about some ideas that I've recently read about in a book called Systems Convening, a crucial form of leadership for the 21st century. This book was written by Etienne and Beverly Wenger Trainer, and folks may know those names as people who were real leaders in promulgating the idea of communities of practice. And in this latest work that they've put out, they talk about this idea of systems convening. And I say in the blog that I discovered that systems convening was a name being given to something I feel like I've done through throughout most of my professional life. So it was kind of neat to read that. They talk about what systems conveners do in many different categories, but in the blog I really focus on the idea that systems conveners are engaged in boundary work. And so, pulling on the ideas that they share in that work, I developed five resolutions that I would like to make for better collaboration in 2022, and that I would encourage others to consider making if you're a resolution making sort of person. And the first one I talked about was respecting the boundaries in order to open those boundaries. The idea being that boundaries are often in place for a reason, for good reasons, and they exist because of different beliefs, passions, or practices, or responsibilities. Really, there are all kinds of reasons that boundaries exist. And even if you want to open up or make them more porous, it's really important to understand why the boundaries are in place and to respect them and respect those reasons. My second resolution has to do learning. And so I say in that resolution, ask first, what can we learn? A systems convener doesn't really just accept those boundaries that are in place. They say, what can we learn, and move forward from there. So I suggest that you might resolve to make that question, what can we learn, central to your efforts in working with others in 2022. My third resolution is take time to frame the question. And I think it's really important to think about the question, because if you just move forward in collaboration, even if the collaboration isn't contentious, or there's nothing controversial about the collaboration, people just, as part of human nature, tend to dig in their own particular kind of way of seeing the world in their own position. And that's an impulse that really needs to be headed off at the pass or to be disarmed. And so one way to do that is to frame a question to focus on in the partnership. And a lot of people say, well, what do we need a question for? Goals are good, but goals tend to really converge the activity and not really open it up, create more divergent opportunities, and help people see how things could move forward in different ways. Having kind of an appreciative question that opens things up and encourages open mindedness, I think, is important in collaborating. My fourth resolution is to create together, to see together. And the idea here is that creating some kind of visual or experiential kind of artifact of a collaboration, or of the beginnings of a collaboration, can be really helpful to bring people together in a collaboration together and help see the way things might proceed. I give the example a process map. A lot of times in an initiative or an organization, folks will map out what things look like, and that becomes a visual representation, and it's something that they can keep coming back to, and not just keep coming back to the process map that may have been created at the beginning, but keep coming back to it to revise it and adjust it as people are learning and advancing the collaboration. And finally, my fifth resolution is to collaborate with humans, not positions. The idea being that a lot of times we bring people together in our collaborations because they have a particular job title or they represent a particular organization or perspective, but that representation is only one small sliver of who that person is. It certainly is not their entire identity. And that kind of the fact that we all have our humanity in common is a really great place to start. Of course, people's titles and positions and roles and perspectives all come into play in collaboration, but starting with the idea that we're collaborating with the people that are in the room as people, I think is really important to effective collaboration. So those are my 5 resolutions for better collaboration in 2022. And Lily, I'd love to hear your thoughts, just any reactions. And in particular, I'd love to hear, Lily, if you think you might adopt any of these resolutions or if you have other resolutions for your collaborations in 2022.
First of all, thank you for just explaining this to us. And this is, like, I think, really great to have this, like, vision and as a resolution for collaboration. And I do that a lot. You like maybe once the beginning of the year, then check it like every 2 months, 3 months to see where I am. And that goes back to your question about just make a question and see if you're still there, or create it
Mm-hmm.
together. So see like you're still on the same page with each other or not. And that also motivates me with others, like, to know that I'm putting effort for the same goal like the
Uh-huh.
other people are doing. So if I don't, if an individual doing what I need to do, and don't think it serves for a better goal or for a overarching like thing for the group, I'm not that motivated if I don't think there's something like similar for everybody that we are putting effort together to do to reach something. So I think that's valuable. But I like it. So with the collaboration with humans, not positions, I don't know, like, if you can give an example, that would be nice, because I think even if we think about humans, but positions is still there. If there's a
That's
hierarchy there,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I can't think of a specific example of at least that I wouldn't want to necessarily call anybody out, but to explore it further, what I would, say is that I think for me, the idea is a lot of times you get together on a project or you're working with a new group of people and there's like an icebreaker, and some people even may say we really should bring some social element into the work that we're doing so that we can get to know each other better because we're going to be able to work more effectively better. I think that's the spirit of what I'm trying to get at when I say collaborate with humans, not positions. We should interact with one another not because of those positions. We shouldn't make those positions or their roles or their titles we shouldn't let that necessarily color the entirety of how we interact with those folks. I think that's what I'm saying is like try to meet people at the level of just being another person too, and having a perspective that comes from their own personal experience, not just the organization that they represent. Does that clarify it at all?
yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Do you have examples of things that you're working on in terms of collaborating with others over the coming year, or you have recently, where you can see? I really liked what you said about the motivation piece, because collaboration really, in order to be sustained, good collaboration really requires that there's something motivating about it. And obviously, we hope that the people who are involved in the collaboration all have the kind of same goal in mind, but
Yeah.
maybe you could say more about that idea of motivation and how some of these things, like having an artifact or coming back to a question, or how that might affect motivation.
Yeah, I had a recent project, so I was the project coordinator for a project, and so there were some students helping me to do that project, and also was just trying to include the ideas of my supervisor there. So the idea was just like to make sure that report is good enough that make that organization qualified to get funding again, to like do like it was like a social advocacy. It's just like family advocacy kind of work. that we
Uh-huh.
needed to show how, like, assess their work and see how they are doing. So doing that and just doing that report and just working with others, it was good. But the motivation part for me was to know that I'm learning something. Like, I guess you also said that, like, for your number two, at what can we learn? And because it was total new to me, I've never been in
Mm-hmm.
like this area, so it was like I knew research design method, but I didn't know much about family advocates. So what can I learn? And for the people that were working, like, they were helping me, what they can learn from me, and just asking them. So sometimes I was just asking them, what do you think, so they wouldn't feel they are left out just to do the work. Or
Right.
even for me, like, in terms of like my supervisor, I was thinking, so like what she wants and what would be beneficial for the, like, the organization to get funding for the next year. So it was like politics involved, if I want to say. So it wasn't just really simple, but knowing that how should I be there in working with my people that are working with me, or just supervisor, and the ideal goal of the funder, that was the, like, a thing that could keep me going
Uh-huh.
and just have the motivation to make sure everybody's getting what they need.
Yeah, I really like that, Lily. I think you pointed out two really important pieces of motivation in collaboration. One being that people are getting what they need, and might get are people getting what they came for in terms of that their practices are being improved, or that their initiative is being advanced, or that they're getting the resources they need, but also just that they're learning. And as you point out, that kind of goes back to my resolution number two about what can we learn. Yeah, I love, for me, learning is a major motivation in anything. And of course, probably most collaborations I'm engaged in are not necessarily about the learning, but it ends up becoming a really big motivator for me. I just want to just take a quick second to welcome Jeff Soxy and Patrick Denkel, who've joined us. I don't know, guys, if you're getting my invitation to speak. Certainly don't feel pressured to accept it. I will tell you that if you're not using Twitter on your phone, you might have trouble accepting the invitation to speak. So it might be good to use Twitter on your phone if you do want to be able to join the conversation as a speaker, which we'd love to have you do, of course, but no worries if you're not able to or not interested. So Lily, let's talk more then about motivation, because I'm realizing now, boy, that is a missing element in this post that I did about how we might resolve to have better collaboration. I'm thinking about what collaborations have I been involved in, what was the key motivating thing for me. And I feel like the learning definitely is almost always why I joined a collaboration. Obviously, I joined many collaborations because people are paying me to do it. Whether it was when I had a regular job, it was part of my job, or now it's because a client has hired me to be part of a collaboration. So obviously that is a motivation, but I think it's learning for me, but it's also about, I think what's cool in a collaboration is that you get to see ideas that you're interested in, or outcomes that you're interested in seeing happen in the world. You're able to see them come alive with other people, right? Like you get to see and hear different people's perspective on that thing that you're so interested in. And I'm curious as to whether, does that play a role for you in collaboration as well, like just hearing what other people think about the ideas that you're interested in, or what different people's perspectives are on the things that you want to make happen in the world.
Definitely. And I think that's like socially, I'm really into doing teamwork, hearing people, like, brainstorming with all the people that I know. Even I don't mind if they are new to the job or they're like more experienced, but just like absolutely you can learn from people that they have more experience. But you shouldn't just like think that maybe you don't know much about that area, you're not eligible to say much. But I think like everyone can see something from different angle. But another thing that also motivates me to keep up the good work is just some, like, my supervisors would also tap on my shoulder and say, hey, it's good, like we are doing something, it's just
Yeah.
making an impact. If I'm doing it, and I don't think that would, like, I think this it should run from the whole team, that they feel that they're doing something good. If sometimes not all the projects they have a positive outcome, they may have negative outcome, but at least they know they're in it together, like they feel they can learn from it and move on, or just not feeling left out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I feel like all of the things you're saying just remind me of this idea that we're all people. trying to get things done. And a lot of the motivation that we do get from collaboration is getting confirmation or affirmation that the stuff that we are interested in, that we are working on, is stuff that's important. So getting that kind of affirmation from your boss, as you mentioned, or from colleagues, all great motivators. So this has been a great conversation about motivation. I see that my friend Jeff has accepted my invitation to speak. And Jeff, I would love to just hear what's on your mind about this idea of better collaboration in 2022. Do you have any resolutions for better collaboration this year?
I think, and I apologize, took your earlier admonition on joining by phone, but I think that's one of those. It's a good example of one of the things that I've been looking at and thinking a lot about in terms of collaboration is really thinking outside of your, I wouldn't necessarily say comfort zone, but looking outside of your neighborhood, so to speak, in looking for collaborators that may be outside of your space, outside of your domain of knowledge, and thinking about what they can contribute to a conversation rather than what you specifically associate them with. And I'll give you a great example of this. We're at the university working on a very short timeline to develop a proposal for the EDA Good Jobs Challenge. And one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is the question of whether we can do something to, as a university that has both an early childhood learning center, a federal earmark of several millions of dollars per year in startup or a head start for research and investigation, as well as a professional education program. Trying to think of how do you take those assets and think about them in different ways to at least develop a more sustainable workforce to help these childcare providers, serve more children. But one of the things that we've been thinking about as we started to do the work, and really where we've gotten the most interest from across campus and really outside of campus, thinking about this is not necessarily in engaging those in the community that have
Oh, we lost you, Jeff. Let's hope that you're able to come back. Maybe you went into a. Oh, I think you're back now, Jeff.
Yep, I'm back. Sorry, it's
okay.
It is the joys again of telecommunication these.
That's right, and learning new technologies. Anyway, please go on. Yeah.
So what I was going to say is really where we're seeing the most interest in collaboration on this application is not necessarily from the domain experts in childhood or early childhood learning or childcare, but rather it's those leaders that they themselves have children and are experiencing the same challenges that others in the market are facing in finding quality childcare. So it's a matter of thinking about the incentives, but I think the other piece of this is, again, looking at a problem, from a different perspective of thinking about who may be motivated to solve a problem as opposed to specifically only those that have solved that same problem in the past. So, expanding context is one of those things that I'm really interested in exploring this year.
That is awesome, Jeff. When I hear you talking about it, I feel like, yeah, there's so much that we've heard, in particular over the last couple of years, about making sure that we're taking a look at who's at the table in our collaborations. And first of all, I think there's two levels here that you're getting at for me. One, is anybody missing that should be at the table, right? Like, because so often we are collaborating on issues and people are missing who ought to be there. They're people who are going to potentially benefit from whatever it is that we're collaborating on. How can we not have their voice at the table, particularly thinking about marginalized communities and people of color and people who are often not given a seat in our conversations and our collaborations. So for me, the first level of what you're talking about, or what it's bringing up for me, is making sure that we have not missed anybody, like that that absolutely should be there at the table and part of the conversation. But then you also bring this other layer of don't get hung up just on who should be at the table, because a lot of times what we default to on who should be at the table is who's been at the table historically, which is not the way to think about it, both because of that inclusion set of issues that I was just talking about, but also because of like novelty and new ideas and different perspectives on things that we may not have thought of before as having relevance to whatever we're collaborating on. But absolutely, we should be opening it up and broadening the context, as you put it. I really like that way of thinking about it, Jeff. And by the way, it's great that you brought up an example from work on a Good Jobs Challenge proposal, because the last time we had this conversation last month, Jenny Mazutowicz talked a lot about the work that she's doing on a Good Jobs Challenge proposal as well. So maybe this is going to become the Good Jobs Challenge podcast. Who knows?
It very well may be, but I think, that's one of those things, again, in thinking about different contexts as it relates to collaboration, that the Good Jobs Challenge is a perfect example of. Because it's an example, again, of a funding program from an agency in the Economic Development Administration whose work has touched a lot on job creation, but has never had any exposure or any funding specifically committed towards workforce training.
That's right. Yeah.
So what you're finding within a lot of these conversations is you're bringing partners into these conversations that aren't part of the traditional workforce development ecosystem, only because of the fact that when you think about the funding model for workforce training, a lot of the partners that are thinking about putting these proposals together would be ineligible for other types of funding streams. So they may have had an interest in the issue, but they had nothing to contribute because there was no incentive for them to participate.
That is, great point. Yeah, and I think it is exciting to see some of this kind of policy happening where there's encouragement, sometimes even requirement, that different perspectives brought to the table. And that, again, in our last Twitter Spaces conversation, we talked a little bit about that. Lily, I'm interested in hearing whether or not any of this stuff that Jeff talked about with regard to broadening the context spoke to you in the kinds of work that you do. And by the way, I'm guessing that Jeff and Lily don't know each other, and you may not know my friend Patrick either, who's here, but just choosing to hang out and listen. But Lily, maybe you could say a little bit about your work as you respond to Jeff's thoughts, and we'll have Jeff introduce himself too a little bit later.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you all virtually and hearing you. So I'm Lily Rossi. I'm a graduate student in public affairs, community development at Rutgers University. I'm also research assistant Walter Institute for Public Affairs, doing public affairs work. So I like the idea of Jeff saying using different partners' ideas, whether they have been doing that kind of work or not. But the problem is like, so how do you want to? My question is just, so if they like give some ideas, who would develop that? Are they the ones, or they're just like you do the brainstorming? So I'm not, because I've not been in that places, so I'm not sure. I want to see who will keep it forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. Jeff, do you have any thoughts in response to Lily? And please do introduce yourself as you respond.
Sure. So I'm Jeff Soxy. I'm the director of the Center for Customized Research and Services at UW Oshkosh. I'm also the founder of Volley Point Economic Advising. So I've worn several hats over my career, as Jim is well aware. I started work in community economic development and spent the better part of 2 decades working in state-level workforce development policy as a labor economist. When we've thought about, and when we used to engage in this work in more of an advisory capacity, one of the things that we often thought about and was well aware of was in conversations where we would facilitate conversations about a particular issue, we knew that discussion would often meander into other places. And the way that we identified individuals that might have other interests is by seeing one who actually diverted that conversation and then who engaged once that conversation had moved. So really, I think the thing that we all pick up in our professional and our personal engagements is this inventory of interest that you pick up just through conversation about pretty much anything. And for me, it's more of a mental Rolodex, which is confirmed through looking at things like social media activity. If I follow someone on Twitter, what are they liking? What are they retweeting? To get a better sense again of what that might look like. But, where that then extends is when we're thinking about bringing in partners on projects, we will do more background research on the potential partners for collaboration than we will about the issue space itself.
Okay, we might be losing you again, Jeff.
Again, Jim, this is the joys of communicating by phone. Again, it's just the joys of the digital divide and who has a reliable cellular connection and who doesn't. But as I was saying, we spend more work thinking about who could partner on a project, oftentimes than we do with the project itself. In terms of keeping record of who has interest in what, it's really more of our recollection of when we may have spoken to someone about something that is on its face ungermane to what their job titles.
Interesting. Does that kind of get to your question there, Lily?
Yeah, it's like identifying the potential partners and move on. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.